Mr. Randall, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting us to your office. A good place to start is always the beginning. Can you tell us where you grew up?
Well, I grew up mostly here in Santa Ana. I came here when I was 8 years old and been here ever since.
Came here from?
Idaho.
Oh, okay. Tell us a little bit about your parents.
Well, there's really not much to talk about there because they're just average parents, I guess you'd say. And my dad worked at different places, and he was in the bank business and the insurance business and all these sort of things. My mother, of course, was mainly a housewife.
Did you have music in the home when you were growing up?
Not really, no.
And you don't really remember too much of life before California?
Well, not a whole lot, but still, when I think back, I can think of a lot of things back there that were pretty primitive to begin with. Because we were in northern Idaho, and it was a primitive area.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
No.
So an only child growing up, and your dad didn't have a permanent job, you said? So
No.
he went around from topic to topic?
Yes.
So as a child, did you have any particular aspects of aspirations, rather, as to what you wanted to do?
I started out to be a doctor, and I stayed that way until I got out of junior college, and went in the Army. And that stopped the whole thing.
Were you enlisted?
Yes.
What sort of experiences did you have there?
Well, I was 3 years in the Army. Although I wasn't overseas, I was in several different branches of the Army. I went in the first part was, I've even forgotten that. I spent the first 6 or 8 months in there, and then I was back and forth between the Signal Corps and the other branch of the service, and eventually into the Air Force.
And you said that stopped your aspirations of being a doctor. You sort of seen enough?
Yeah, well, after I wasted 3 years in the Army, I figured I didn't have the ambition to go ahead and go back to medical school or finish college.
Did you play an instrument at all as you were growing up?
Very little. I had a guitar and messed with it, but I wouldn't say that I played it. Played with it.
So now you're out of junior college and you went to the Army for a while. What happened next?
In what way are we?
Well, just what did you do when you came back out of the Army?
Well, when I came back out of the Army, I went into the radio business. I had thought, when I'd planned my life pretty carefully, and I had planned when I got out of the Army that I'd take whatever time it might take, 6 months or whatever, and make sure I was in the right spot, because I had no ties, no ambition along any particular line. And of course, I was well known in the radio business, and I got out of the Army, I think, on Thursday, as I recall, and I was employed and going to work next Monday morning. I was talking to Leo Fender, and he insisted that I had to come take his place. That he worked too hard all the time. He didn't want to keep up with it, and to come over to his radio television equipment company. And I went over there and spent some time with him.
I'll pause it for just a second. So when was the first time you met Leo? Was it before the war then?
Oh yes, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I had known Leo for a long time. I don't know just how long, but a long time before I went in the service, and was friends with him.
How did you first meet him?
I was selling radio parts, and he was using part of them, and I used to call on him and sell them there.
And explain to me what he was doing at that time. He had already had his established repair shop, right?
He had a radio shop, a repair shop.
What sort of idea did you have of him early on? What sort of guy did you think he was?
I can't recall I had any particular status for him. He just I considered him to be a friend, and I was a friend of his, and we used to talk a lot, and it was one of those places where, traveling around, I'd stop, and because he was in the radio business, and in that business which interested me, I was interested in talking to him.
Now, just so I have this straight in my head, you were interested in the radio business from what aspect? Being an on-air person, or being sort of the gadget guy?
Well, I had an amateur radio license from 1956 or 1955, somewhere back in there. And I had been interested in radio all my life as a kind of a secondary thing. And I had I had built a couple of commercial transmitters for agency. I've forgotten who it was, but one was over in somewhere Los Angeles, another was up north around San Paulo or somewhere up there. And they had the transmitters that I bought, or I built at that time. And I had done a lot of work in the radio business after I got in the Army.
And the audience or I should say the customer base that Leo had and you were supplying things for, were who? Who were the people that were coming into his shop?
Well, mostly they were people who had radios that they couldn't get fixed any place because at that time repair parts were hard to get a hold of. And you either had to find the right repair part or be able to repair the one that was in there. And that's what he was doing in his radio shop.
What's interesting is that this is also the era where the radio is the big king of the house, as they used to call it.
Oh yes, yeah. Indeed, that was true.
Did you have any idea that he was interested in expanding his business?
Not at that time, I didn't, no, because he hadn't started anything at that time. I don't remember exactly what the time level was, but it was prior to starting in the guitar business or amplifier business.
So did you get interested in do any work with the broadcasting then?
Only in the remote end of it.
So what were some of the things that you were supplying? Mostly transformers and that sort of thing?
All radio parts, all the repair parts.
And was that a business that you started on your own?
No, I took over a business in Santa Ana, which was parallel to Francis Hall's business. He had radio television equipment company, and I had radio something or other, and can't remember the name of it even. And I had a nice shop over on Sycamore Street in Santa Ana, and did considerable business there before I finally had to go in the Army.
What's interesting to me is what is pretty well known in our industry is that you're one of the greatest businessmen of the industry. And I haven't heard anything about your education in terms of business. How did you pick that up? Just having a bunch of experiences?
Well, I think probably because, of course, I went through junior college, and so I had all that educational background, but it wasn't exactly centered in the business part of it.
Mr. Randall, were you married when you went into the Army?
Oh, yes. Married and had Donnie. Yeah.
How did you meet your wife?
Well, I met her in 4th grade in school. We went through school together. Of course, I wasn't associated with her necessarily, but that's the way it turned out in the end. And after I got into high school, probably junior in high school, I think I started going with her, and we continued on until we finally were married, and ultimately had the first child.
So when you got out of the Army, you were married and had a child already.
Oh, yes.
So you really needed to
I
get
spent
a job.
I spent 3 years in the Army.
It doesn't sound like the greatest experience, though.
It wasn't that bad, really. Fortunately, I had the kind of talent, if you want to call it that they were looking for, and I was given some pretty good duty. And I unfortunately, or fortunately, as you might say, had a problem, physical problem, that kept me from being transferred out of the area that I was in. And I tried on several occasions to get out of that and to overcome it, but they wouldn't do anything about it.
So now you have a kid and you're married and the war is over, and the atmosphere, I didn't live during that time, but as I understand it, it was a renewal. People are moving out of the countries into the cities, musical styles are changing. Of course, we now know it historically as a time where there's a lot of innovative things happening with electronics and instruments and so on. An exciting time. What did your career path look like for you when you came out of the Army?
Well, I thought when I was in the Army that I wasn't going to do anything. I was going to take as long as it took for me to decide. It was like getting born again, you know. I had no contacts, no place to go, and I didn't have any bills to pay, and I didn't have anything going. And you step out of the Army, you step back in your civilian clothes, and you don't know which way to turn because you have no place to go or no place to sit, nobody to see necessarily. So I thought what I would do, that I had to take at least 6 months and look around and make sure I was doing the right thing, because I was starting over again. And as I say, I got out of the Army on Thursday and I went to work for Francis Hall on Monday. He begged me and cried on my shoulder and everything else to get me to come to work for him, and I didn't have guts enough to stay with my idea.
Was that a good experience with Hall?
It was an experience, let's put it that way.
And how long was that?
I stayed with him for several years, I guess, till 1953 or thereabouts.
and you were still in contact with Leo, so you knew what he was doing during that
Oh yeah,
time.
I was selling Leo parts all that time, radio parts.
What was your impression when you first found out that he was interested in sort of diverting from his radio repair and getting into making guitars?
Well, he hasn't gotten that far that time. He was still deep in the retail business, and he had a store and he had a radio shop, the whole thing, and it was going along very nicely. And I was selling him repair parts for his business, and going from there. So it didn't change his method of operation at all that I could see.
When did that occur? And did he talk to you about it?
We talked on a number of occasions, yeah, because I had the technical background that he needed, and because I had been deep in radio all the time, and I had an amateur radio license, and I had a commercial license, and so I had all that background to refer to.
And he had quite a background too, in terms of electronics and so on.
He had a strange background. He went to junior college, and he got out as an accountant. And he got trapped in some kind of a retail business, and it eventually ran into the radio repair business. So he was a radio repairman there from the time I first knew him till the end.
A lot of people who write about you in different trade magazine articles and so on refer to you as the business guy behind Leo. Do you like that image? Because there really was more to it than what you did than just the business side.
Well, there was, but Leo didn't have any business ability at all, and I don't mean that, sarcastically or anything like that. It's just the fact that he just never did. And if anything concerning business came along, he wanted to go hide someplace and stay back in the corner. And so somebody had to do it, and I did it. When we ultimately sold the business, I had been dealing with several purchasers, and the main purchaser turned out to be CBS. And when we finally decided to sell to CBS, I had to go back to New York, and Leo wouldn't even go back till the finish of the contract or anything. He didn't want any part of it.
Why do you suppose?
He was just a more or less retiring type of guy. He just he didn't want to be in that kind of business. Didn't want to be involved in it.
Tell me a little bit about some of the roles that you did play for the company. What were some of the projects and exactly how did you help with different aspects of the business?
Well, I think I helped a considerable amount because I had the technical background when it came to amplifiers and things like that. And I had some business background, which was necessary. And I pretty well did everything that was to do as far as the business was concerned. Leo didn't want to be messing with it. He wanted to stay out of it. So because the two of us were partners, I handled all the business activity as well as some of the technical activity.
So as far as your career went, it was right after Hall that you worked with Leo?
Yes.
Full time? And that was about what, 53?
53.
How did you and Leo get started together?
No, I knew him.
I mean, business, the Fender Guitar Company, how did it get started?
Well,
Were there four of you? Weren't there four of you?
well, there were some other people that got involved, but they were only in it just shortly.
One of them died
Oh no, one of them didn't die.
in a car accident, I thought.
We kicked one of them out.
Oh. Didn't one of them die in a car accident and then the other one?
Oh, that was Charlie Hayes. He was a salesman for us.
Was he part of the ownership also?
I don't think so.
Originally, I thought there were four of you.
I don't recall. I really don't recall if she was. I don't think he was though. I'd hate to give you some bad information, but I can't picture him as being. I don't think he'd.
Well, Leo was working on guitars as early as what, 51? Right? The
I don't think so.
Telecaster.
I don't think so. Well, I don't know.
But that was all still made under his radio repair shop name, his sort of prototypes and his sort of experimental things.
Well, you see, what happened, I was the general manager of the radio business over there. And we put him, you might say put him in business, because I started selling the stuff and hiring these guys that are going out and selling it. And he wasn't doing anything before we started that. Virtually nothing, except, between individuals. And we had probably half a dozen salesmen around the country when I left Radio Tel and went into the guitar business full time.
What's sort of interesting to me, I'd love to get your perspective, is the early days of Fender are now sort of known for this concept of following Henry Ford and mass producing a guitar that you can bolt a neck on, and all these pieces that sort of in the assembly line come together as this mass produced wonderful instrument that it's got quality control like probably very few instruments have had. Where did that concept come from?
Wallace, I can't see him over there.
Oh, I disappeared in the glare.
There, that's it. That's okay.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Adds to the warmth, actually. Where did that concept come from?
I say again, I missed that.
Okay. Well, I'm just sort of wondering where the concept of this mass production of the guitar came from, where you would have an assembly line similar to Henry Ford, bolt on this neck, come up with this great quality control of each instrument to produce some wonderful products. That's really what Leo Fender is known for in the early days. Where did that come from? Was that something that you were around and helped develop?
Well, he hadn't developed any of that when we started.
Is that right?
Yeah. And then after we started and developed a market, things began to develop so that we could see where we were going. And I worked with him to get some of these things going in the whole picture there.
What particular goal did you have of the company when you first started?
Well, Leo and I were partners, 50-50 partners.
So the idea is you're going to take, well, I'm a little confused about this. It couldn't be as black and white as I think I've read, where you handled certain things and he handled certain things. 50-50 often means that two guys are working hard to create something.
Well, it turned out to be pretty much like that, because Leo didn't want anything to do with the business part of it, and I took over that part entirely. And I had all the technical background as far as the amplifiers and everything like that are concerned, so I could be helpful to him in that respect. But it pretty well divided us in our own particular way.
Mm.
Um,
Did you need to raise capital in order to get this thing off the ground?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And was that part of your?
Yeah, I borrowed at that time. I borrowed $50,000 without anything to pay for it. But I had a nice old gentleman who was manager of the Security Pacific National Bank there, and he liked me. And when I wanted $50,000, we finally decided how I'd do it. So I got the $50,000. And started putting it into the business.
That was a lot of money back then.
Yes, it was.
Were you worried about it?
I probably didn't know enough to be worried.
Tell me a little bit about what you were working with in terms of the amplifier. Were there certain problems that Leo kept coming up with when he's trying to amplify? I'm 53, I'm thinking this is probably the tail end of the Telecaster in the early days of the Stratocaster, right? Or were you also?
I can't tell you exactly, but I don't know just when those. I'm going back and looking at the record just when they came about, but you could be right as far as that goes, but I can't say.
And the amplifier, what do you recall in the early days that needed to be sort of tweaked in order to create a successful product?
Oh yes, yeah. The things that he had originally were pretty Mickey Mouse. They were, I'd say, just a wooden box frame with a chassis in it and some radio parts put together to make an amplifier. And once we got going, I decided that we wanted to make this a business. Why we had to, develop things a little bit more in a commercial factor.
How do you think the explosion of the Stratocaster took on? I mean, how exactly was that created? This great need that becomes the biggest selling instrument on the planet. Was it a PR thing? Was it strictly because you had a quality product? What do you think it was?
It was a little bit of everything. We had a quality product, but it wasn't recognized as such because it was just a wooden guitar. But the fact is that once it was started, it was found out that you could play that guitar as loud as you wanted to without feedback. And that was the trouble with guitars in the past. They had a box on them, and they turn up the volume a little bit, and they start to vibrate and the feedback, and you have to keep the thing down. You couldn't turn up the volume on it any good. Mm. So once we got the solid body guitar going, we could turn up the volume, and we could drown out the drummer, and everybody else wanted to. And that was a big thing as far as some of these Western bands and pop bands and all were going. They liked that.
It was so innovative, and it really took on exactly what technology was available at that time. And we're not just talking about the Stratocaster, but the amplifier as well. I mean, it was a full package that you guys produced. Was there any great satisfaction of that in the early days, even before it sort of caught on, that you created something?
And what do you mean by that? I don't understand what you're...
Well, did you get a sense, even before it was popular, that what you created was satisfying to you guys? Or was there always room for improvement?
Well, the amplifiers they're building today are essentially the same amplifiers that we built back then. The tube amplifiers, they haven't changed. And the solid state amplifiers I don't think have changed from the time that we built the first ones either. They're just something that we knew about and knew how to handle, and we did. We after we got out of the solid wood guitar type thing and got into more commercial units, the amplifiers, all I got was a little bit of tweaking here and there to bring them along, and they performed extremely well. We had a lot of trouble with speakers originally because speakers weren't built for that kind of business. They're built to be a radio, something you listen to in your living room or something like that. And here we were putting in 100 watts into them and blowing it all over the country. And it took a while for them to catch up with us as far as the speakers was concerned. Mm. But we kept whittling with them and pleading with them and talking to them, and they eventually came around to it. Something they hadn't had to do before because they didn't have any market for it.
Right. I think that's what's pretty clear about the electric guitar is the market was really created, developed by Fender. It's interesting to me though that you guys, because you were first, you probably had some obstacles. You probably had some people that disagreed with what you were doing. There's a story that you and Leo took one of the solid body guitars to a NAMM show, and somebody called it a paddle oar or something like that and rejected it as an instrument.
Well, we went through a lot of that, of course, because it was new and it was different, and it was a thing that they'd look at and say, oh, it's just a board, and but the people who were really in the business knew better because they could see the entry we were making into the business with that particular type of guitar. Mm. So we kept at it pretty well.
Who were the first big names you had playing it, Mr. Randall?
Oh, geez, I don't remember.
A lot of the country guys played the guitars way before there was even a rock and roll, which is interesting to me. One of the things we bring out in our museum is that it was really country and western music, like Billy Carson came up with some ideas. Yes, ma'am. Yes. We were talking about the country players, and tell me about...
Well, you see, the country is the only thing that existed at that time. So it wasn't a matter of selecting country out of something else. But it wasn't until the rock and roll didn't come around. Some first rock and roll was developed somewhere around 1955. Was the first that we saw that. So from for the first part of the, from probably 1949 until 1955, we had the market to ourselves, you might say. Mm. Then, of course, when they saw what was going on, we had Gibson to put up with, as well as some of the other players along the way, but they never gave us any competition to speak of.
What's interesting to me is that you're developing this product for what is, in sort of retrospect, turns out to be a very small market, the country and western players, as opposed to the rock and roll generation that uses it. Were you pretty satisfied with the numbers that you were generating in terms of sales before rock and roll?
Well, we didn't know any better. But it was big. It was big before that because country western was big all over the United States. I think the biggest market was around Boston, somewhere back in there. You know, they all think about Texas and Oklahoma and all that sort of thing, but I think one of the biggest markets was in the Boston area. And it was big. It was big. We're selling all we could make.
Can you tell me a little bit about your personal thoughts about some of the folks that were at Fender, like Freddie Tavares? What sort of guy was he? I understand he was from Hawaii and quite a player.
Freddie was very talented. He was a talented player. He also had a lot of technical background. And he was working with Leo in the lab there. And even though he knew what he was doing, he'd probably ask Fender, go and say, what do you think we ought to do here, Leo? You know, this type of thing, which pleased Leo, you know, because it made him feel like he was running the show. But Freddie was very good all by himself, actually.
Mm.
Nice guy.
Is it Bob Prine or Bill Prine?
Bob Prine.
Bob.
Mm-hmm.
He's the gentleman who helped me get your telephone number, so I have him to thank for
Here's
that.
the things here.
Yeah. What's your thoughts about his contributions to Fender?
Well, he did a lot for us because we used him as our in-house artist, you might say, and he helped us with the magazine parts of it and all it. The part that we were not that well acquainted with, Billy helped us with some of that. Bill was not. In fact, I see Bill every once in a while now. He's involved with.
Bob, right?
Yeah.
I thought you said Bill. Did you say Bill or Bob?
I don't know. Does it say Bill or Bob?
I'm not
right.
sure.
Yeah, he comes here. Comes here and visits Mr. Randall from time to time. He's coming this week, I think, Mr. Randall.
He's involved with a school in Pasadena.
Right.
That
yeah,
they're
sort of bringing that back.
they're getting it back. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Bob is a very nice man.
What about George Fullerton? What are your thoughts about him?
George is I can't really say what I think about him. He was one of Leo's favorites because he was licking Leo's boots all the times. But he's I just can't tell you anything.
In your in the sort of the wake of rock and roll, one of the names I think that Wallace was thinking of was Buddy Holly, one of the first rock and roll guys to play a Stratocaster on live television. When I talked to Prine about it, he said, boy, that was maybe one of the main moments in rock and roll when the Fender became sort of synonymous with that sound. And then after that, this just huge wave of success came. But what's interesting to me is that you guys never seem to have rested on your laurels and just sort of kept just with the Stratocaster. There was an awful lot of innovative products that you guys continued to work on, including the Jazzmaster and some others. What was the thought process behind that?
Well, you may not know it, but I named every one of our products, with one exception, and that was one of the basses that Leo said, oh, we got to do it like this. So I said, okay, that's all right. But all the rest of the products, I produced the names for them. And that's starting from the very smallest Fender student type product on up to the rest of the whole show.
Wow.
But just like the thing that came out first was the solid body guitar with a single pickup. And forgotten what name did we have on that. We had a
Broadcaster?
might have been a broadcaster. In any event, the name was belonged to
Gretsch.
Gretsch, yeah. And we produced maybe 50, 100 pieces. The name broadcaster, and we had to change it. And that's when I took it to the Telecaster because it seemed appropriate, you know. And we went from the Telecaster with a single pickup to the double pickup, and then
How did it seem appropriate? Because of television, you mean?
that and just the name sounded right for what we were doing.
Mm.
But television was having a big influence at that time. Now we went to from there to the Stratocaster, and which was the next step from telephone, telegraph, on up to what am I trying to say?
Stratosphere.
The stratosphere, yeah. Stratosphere, and then just tried to keep them in line, you know, as much as we could.
Mm. So you named the Jazz Master as well?
Every one of the products, every one of them.
What was the thought behind the Jazz Master? Where'd that name come from? Were you trying to market to a different genre?
Just a made-up name.
Mm.
You know, being in the business at the time, we of course were looking for inroads to other markets and all that sort of thing. And the jazz players at that time were playing box guitars, and they weren't getting any place because they couldn't be heard.
Mm.
They'd turn up the volume a little bit and they'd feedback and they were stuck. And so we developed this guitar that we felt had certain amount of capability in the jazz field, and so we named it the Jazz Master.
Hmm. Were you pretty surprised at the success of the Stratocaster?
I guess I was surprised at any of it as far as that goes. We kept right through it until we sold it to CBS, and every year was a bigger year and more action. So I was pretty happy with the whole thing.
Now you mentioned a while ago about putting it up for sale. Did you make it known that you were interested in selling it, or did CBS come to you and ask you to sell it?
No, Leo thought he was getting sick or was sick or something, and he wanted to sell it to me for a ridiculous price, by his half of it.
Ridiculously low.
And I could see that wouldn't work, because if I bought it from him for that price, 6 months later he'd come back and say, "Oh, you dirty rat, you cheated me, you did this, you did that." Knowing Leo the way I did, that was the way it had happened. And so I had a meeting with him. I sat down, I explained the whole situation to him.
Can you keep your hands down?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I explained the whole situation to him, that why I didn't want to do that and why we should do something else. And so he said, "Okay, but I don't want to be a part of it. I can't do that sort of thing." I said, "That's all right. I'll take care of it for you." So that's when it started, and I started looking around for some kind of outlet, and I talked to Gretsch and to it was the one in can't remember half these
Chicago
things.
Musical?
No, not Chicago Musical. Well, anyhow, to several of the different players in the business, or the manufacturers in the business, and why can't I remember that guy's name? he came out and spent a day or two with me, and we went through the whole thing and doctored it all up so they could, have a piece to sell or a piece to buy. And at that time, I was dealing with also dealing with CBS, and they didn't want to do anything because they were tied up with a big show of some kind in Bermuda or someplace. It was one of the islands out there. So I said, okay, so waited, and after that initial contact, they got really serious about it. And I guess I must have made at least half a dozen trips back to New York, talking with them and meeting with them and going through it with them. And finally we agreed it. It was dealing with them at one time, and Clive Davis, who you may have heard of.
Sure.
He was the manager of one of the divisions of CBS. And he and another guy were dealing with me, and so I just absolutely would get them all wound up into a jam. They didn't know what to do. Oh, I'm going to have to go back and talk to him. He said, I'll have to talk to you later about this. And I said, okay, go ahead. So eventually we came to what I felt was a reasonable offer, and they said it was firm with them. So I called Leo and I said, Leo, how would you like to do this? Oh, you're kidding. No, I'm not kidding you, Leo. Honest to God, I've got this offer now. Oh my gosh, he just about died. And he was pretty happy about the whole thing.
Now, tell me, part of the contract was that he couldn't use his name. Is that right? In terms of Fender, was that part of the deal with CBS?
I don't recall specifically that it was part of the deal, but it could have been. But it was we had only 5 years to adhere to anything that they wanted to do, and one of the things that was paramount thing was I had to stay with them for 5 years, and I was made the only manager. I was president of the what they call the musical instrument division, and I stayed with CBS from 65 to 70.
How well established was their musical instrument division in
They didn't have
65?
anything.
They didn't have.
They didn't have anything. In fact, they were on an expansion deal then, and they shot themselves in the foot every time they turned around. They bought us. They bought Leslie Speakers, and they bought Creative Playthings, and I don't know, 2 or 3 other companies.
Lowry, was that one of them? I think.
Lowry is one of them. That was part of the Leslie Speaker deal.
Oh, okay. And
But
then Steinway after that, right?
Steinway was a later thing than that. But they lost every one of them. They just screwed every one of them into the ground. They had no business being in that kind of business. They just weren't suited to it.
Even if they hired people, this is the part I don't understand. Even when CBS hired people like you, kept you on for 5 years, had people like Bob Campbell, had people like Billy Schultz, people like that who had been in the industry, who had been knowledgeable about selling musical products, they still didn't get up to speed on becoming a business to selling instruments?
I don't think Bill Schultz was ever involved with them. I don't think he was. He was in another branch of the business, another.
Well, he was with Yamaha, and I think he was with CBS, but maybe that was after 70.
He wasn't CBS as long as I can remember.
Hmm.
They,
But why didn't CBS get it if they had people in the industry? What do you think?
well, you have to know CBS to begin with. They think they're superior to everybody else in the country, and they just couldn't see stepping down to lowering themselves to talking to somebody like music business.
Hmm. Interesting. What sort of working relationship did you have with Bob Campbell?
Well, I had a nice relationship with Bob. Bob was a nice man. Bleeding all over the place.
I got a chance to interview him, and he just seems so articulate, very educated guy.
Yeah, he's a very nice man. Is he still alive?
Yeah, he lives in Bloomington, Indiana.
He's not alive.
Well, he lives in Bloomington, Indiana.
No, Bob is a nice man, a very nice man.
When I asked him a question, I would love to get your thoughts about this. Of course, there's this whole term now of pre-CBS Fenders. Do you see that there was any justification of sort of belittling the quality of the Fender guitar after CBS took over?
No, I think that's just poppycock and a lot of idle talk going around, because we continued to do things like we did at Fender and continued to be as active at viewing certain elements of the business as we were before. And I think what happened, some of the things that occurred were kind of asinine because they weren't good ideas. But as far as the basic product is concerned, it wasn't damaged at all. It wasn't cheapened, or, of course, how do you cheapen something that's built out of a piece of wood, you know?
I wondered about that because even Freddie Tavares was with you at CBS for a while, isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
So two of the main guys were still on board to sort of make sure that it was still a Fender product.
Yeah, it wasn't changed at all. But if we could find a way to do something better, we did it. But they also came up with some certain things that didn't turn out to be so good, but they were later developments of the company.
Do you recall any of those?
Oh, they were off-breed type amplifiers or various things like that really some guy get their imagination going and they'd dream up something that still the basic amplifiers that we were making, I think they're still selling today.
So was there a time after '65 when you went to CBS that you worked with Leo, or was that the last time you worked with Leo?
After CBS?
Yeah, when you sold to CBS, did you work with Leo again after that?
To some extent, yes. Although he wasn't kept on, but I've forgotten what they did with him. I think that he had to. I don't remember, but he didn't have any contact in the business except through me. And at first he was very delighted. That was great for him, because that's what he wanted. But then after we operated a year or so, he was feeling better, and he could see that things were going well, and that we were doing things right. He got to be a little nervous about it, and started saying things that he wished he hadn't said, probably.
Mm.
But it was just one of those things that, second thoughts, you know.
And then he started G&L, I guess.
Yeah, he started G&L.
What did you think of that endeavor?
I didn't think much of it, actually. As it turned out, there wasn't much to it.
It sort of kept him busy, though.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was made with George Fullerton and Leo Fender, so it was G&L.
Didn't he work with Music Man before that? Wasn't he involved in that with Walker, Tommy Walker? I think he was working with them. He lent them money for that, gave them advice, and then he did G&L afterwards.
I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, did you like the 5 years that you were at CBS, or were you sort of glad when they were over?
Well, the first year was okay because I was a hero.
How so?
And after that, it started going downhill, and I could have probably bombed the place by the time I got out of there if I could find a bomb any place. They were so damn dumb, and they just should never. Well, like I say, every business they tried to get into, they screwed up. And it's terrible when you're working with a bunch of guys like that don't know what they're doing. And they had more people than they knew what to do with to begin with. And you know, it's one thing to be working in with people and music, and it is to be able working with other kinds of products.
Right. Good
And
point.
they were just absolutely stupid. It came right down to it.
Wow. So what did you mean that you were sort of the hero the first year? Because of the success of Fender? And
Oh yeah, we went crazy. We almost doubled the business the first year. Because we just turned it on, and we had the orders that were being filled slowly, you know, if I might say so. And we were able to catch up on some of those and really get it going.
That's amazing. So as soon as your 5-year contract was up, you were out of there?
I was out of there, yeah. Yep, completely.
I know Campbell sure enjoyed working with you. Was that sort of that was sort of a good relationship?
Oh, Bob was a nice man, yes. I liked him very much.
But what did you do right after that? 1970. Did you go right into something else?
Yeah, I started my own business. There it is up there.
Randall.
Yeah. Yeah.
What were your thoughts about that?
Well, I'll tell you, when I got out of the guitar business, it was like getting born again, getting rid of CBS. I mean, they were such a bunch of idiots up there that you couldn't believe it. And I was probably a little confused and a little dejected and all, because it was very, very difficult emotionally. And after thinking it over, I thought, boy, I am lucky, you know, I'm out of there now. I can do what I want to do. And I thought what I wanted to do, and I thought of maybe going back in the radio business and being a manufacturer's rep or something of that nature, which I had attempted to do or was thinking of doing when I got out of the Army. But I said, well, I've got all this technical background, and why shouldn't I use it? So I decided to go into the amplifier business rather than anything else, and because that was really the technical background that I had was electronics, and so I started in the amplifier business.
Hmm. Did you have to create a whole new amplifier to make sure that you weren't going to jeopardize any sort of copyrights that the CBS?
There weren't any copyrights that mattered, and the stuff that we did was, in most cases, just completely different from what they had.
Hmm. Was that a pretty successful run for you?
Well, I think it was pretty good, yeah. Built some terrific amplifiers. That one right there behind you is still a terrific amplifier today. I think they're still probably making it someplace. The guy that finally wound up with the company, he's in Chicago.
Hmm.
And I think they're still selling that particular amplifier. It's a terrific amplifier.
What other products did you have in the line besides amplifiers, or was that all you concentrated
It was
on?
mainly just amplifiers and all the stuff that went with it.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything that you were particularly proud of in terms of products? Besides, what model amplifier was that?
Now we call that the,
Is that the RG, or is that?
no, what was that called? I'll tell you, I can't tell you. I don't mean to sound dumbering, but I'll tell you the problem I have. The past year has been a real bear on me, and I went from starting in November last year. I went in the hospital to have my back operated on. I wound up with my front operated on instead, and I had a triple bypass.
Oh.
And I got out of there, and I was out of the hospital 2 or 3 days. I had a stroke, and I was back in the hospital for, I don't know how long I was in there. I mean, 4 or 5, 6 days, whatever it was. But it screwed up my mind. And I got out of that, and I was going along, and then my wife passed away. And then I had to go back in the hospital and have my leg operated on. It's just been a hell of a deal. And the stroke, there's some things that I just, little details I don't remember. They say they'll come back, but they haven't seemed to be coming back very fast.
Well, you're a great storyteller, and you know enough of this stuff that it's coming along very good for me. I just had one other concept I'd like to get from you, and that is, what were your thoughts about the NAMM show? I mean, was it a useful tool for you as a manufacturer to be a part of that?
It was something you had to do. Competitively, you had to do it because the others were doing it. Mm-hmm. And I never felt that you really got as much out of it as you put into it. We, of course, were the biggest ones in the business, and we had the biggest crowds at our place. When we had it in Chicago at the can't even think of the name of the hotel now.
Is it the Palmer House?
Palmer House. We had the lower part of the basement of the Palmer House, which is a display business. We had one whole section of that we had all of our stuff in. And we did very well with those things at the time. But I think I forgot where I was going.
This has been really fun.
What were we talking about?
The NAMM show.
Oh. Well, it was okay, and we did all right. There's one thing that has to be done when you're merchandising something like this. It's got to be seen, and you've got to have somebody playing it. And our artists that we had most of the good ones, were a big asset to us. And I introduced it over in Europe, and we were selling it all over Europe. And these guys would go crazy, you know. They'd see some artists that they recognize, and they'd just go wild. But we used to go to the show in Frankfurt.
Oh, the Frankfurt Fair?
Yeah. And we started that show when there's nobody else there in the business. And Lord, it's big now, it's huge. And we were in there for like 25, 26, 27 years. And I was traveling all over Western Europe at that time, either before or after the show, and talking to the people that we were selling to, or wanted to sell to. And we had a great deal of respect over there as far as the product is concerned. And it gave us a big edge on the market to be able to do that.
Did you enjoy your time in the music industry?
Yes, I did. I really did. I enjoyed everything about it, I guess you'd say. I traveled a great deal. It was hard on my home life, and I met a great many people, made friends with a great many people that were popular. And of course, I was working with something that I knew intimately well, and so it worked out very well.
Well, that's good. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for spending so much of it with me.
Well, I'll spend all the time you want as far as that goes. And I don't know that I've given you any decent information or not, but
Definitely, it's great.
But it was a good time as far as I was concerned. It worked out well, and I covered an awful lot of ground during that time. I was over in Europe sometimes three times a year, because we got to going over there for the Frankfurt show in latter part of February or in the middle of March or sometime.
Right, right.
And then there was a show that came along in London, which is in the middle of the summer. You go in there, and the various other things that were going on that we tried to keep up with. And of course, I knew everybody in the business here and there, and so I had every place I went. I was never alone, that's for sure.
Tell me about this painting over here. Where'd that come from?
That's a Perrine deal.
Is that right? Wow, it's beautiful.
Yeah, Bob did that one. It was used in one of our catalogs, I think.
It's beautiful.
This was the cover of one of our catalogs. This is the original painting that this catalog is made from.
Is that also Perrine?
No, this was some commercial artist in L.A., I think, that did that. Bob was the one that was, I think, the one that was responsible for getting it.
Yeah, that's definitely very Fender-ish.
Yeah, it's always been one of my favorites.
Hmm.
We had a lot of contacts with people around the world and various things.
Well, again, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for inviting me. This is terrific. You did good.
I don't know about that, but if I had known exactly what you wanted and everything, then I could probably been a little better prepared.
I thought it was great. You lived it. How much more prepared do you need to be?
Well, like I said, this stroke I had earlier this year kind of screwed up my mind, and it takes me a while to get things reorganized. I'm supposed to go back like it was, but it's not going back very fast. I know that because just certain things are just gone completely. I have a hard time remembering.
Well, I think it turned out very well. I appreciate the time. Well, as Wallace indicated, we forgot to ask about
Harold Rhodes.
Mr. Rhodes, Harold Rhodes. Tell me a little bit about that endeavor.
Gosh, I don't know.
Did he come to you with an idea?
I'm trying to think where I first ran into him. I can't remember where I first ran into him at this point. Harold was a very nice man, very good friend of mine, and we tried. In fact, we made a great many of the keyboard deals, the short one and the standard one, and sold them all over the world, in fact. And after CBS bought the business, as I recall, they didn't want to mess with the piano. I don't recall this for sure, but that's my recollection. And Harold got kind of put out to pasture, and he talked to me every once in a while, and he'd have some new idea or something to go along with it, but we never got any place together before he passed away. But he was a very nice man. He was a funny guy. I'll tell you one thing that he did. We were having a seminar or something up in Portland, Oregon, and we sent Harold up there and sent the instrument up there and everything. And when Harold got up there, he'd forgotten something. I've forgotten what it was that he'd forgotten. So instead of phoning down to have it set up, he got back on the airplane, came back down to Fullerton to get it and take it back up there. That was the way he thought.
He had a lot of amazing ideas, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He was a nice man, and we used to have some pretty interesting discussions together. But he got sick, and he never came back to where he could do anything about it.
In the early days of the Fender Rhodes, the concept of this keyboard, portable keyboard, wasn't that a little incongruous with what Fender's products were, or did it really fit in?
Well, it fitted in the fact that they had to have amplification to begin with, and so we built the amplification for it, and went on from there. But Leo kept Harold at arm's length all the time, and Leo kept fiddling with the things that Harold came up with. He was going to do a better job than Harold had done, and as a consequence, he never got any place with it. And then when I took over completely after that deal, when CBS bought the place, I had a meeting with Harold and everybody involved in it, and I asked Harold if he really thought he'd gotten the thing to where he could rely on it, and he said yes. I said, okay, we'll stop it right there, and we'll start and we'll sell them right there. Don't make any changes unless I'm advised of what you want to do and whether we want to do it or not. So we put it together and started selling them right there, period.
So you really put up the money to finance that.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
What was Leo's thought about that?
I don't recall that we had any discussion of it, actually. Leo wanted to make it his idea. That's what was going on all the time. That's why he kept Harold at arm's length and kept pushing him off, not letting him get any place with it. And he was, in the meantime, working like crazy in between, trying to develop something that was similar to it, but he never realized anything out of it. But
was Harold pretty happy in the end with the product?
I think he was. I think he was. I think he had other ideas he'd like to incorporate time to time, but I think basically he was pretty well pleased with it.
And that key base that you guys came up with was the smaller unit, was very innovative.
Fender bass, yeah.
Way ahead of its time.
Yeah. That was part of Harold's deal too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a pretty good deal. But you have certain personalities that get involved in all these things, you know, and finding your way around them or past them or into them or whatever it is, sometimes it's a lot of work just to get the thing going.
Yeah, that's true. Were you pretty happy with the precision bass as well?
Oh yes, we sold a jillion of them. Yeah.
Somebody once told me that that was Leo's favorite project. There was a lot that had to go into that. A whole new amp, a whole new set of strings, a whole new way of connecting the neck. I mean, it was just a big challenge from the very beginning. Did you view it that way as well, as a real great accomplishment?
I think whoever you heard that from didn't know what he's talking about.
Really?
Yeah. Because it wasn't any great mystery to it or anything like that. It had a little longer neck and was anchored the same way it was before, and the neck had a rod in it. It wasn't any big deal. I don't think that we ever had a real problem with it as far as that goes. We had a little problem with the thing that, I don't remember if we ever elected or not, but there was one note that the thing would fall apart on. You could come down the keyboard and you come to that one note and wonder where it went, you know. And we were able to get around it all the time, but it was an annoyance. It annoyed me terribly. And trying to figure out some way to keep it from doing that. But it seemed to be a common parallel point between the neck and the actual string vibrating at that particular frequency, that they just canceled each other somehow. But it didn't seem to, after we got it pretty well taken care of, why it didn't seem to make any difference, because we sold a jillion of them.
I think I got that information from George Fullerton. Does that surprise you?
Oh yeah, George is full of crap. You know, people like that. He never had any part of the business. He worked in the factory, and Leo took kind of special care of him and helped him along. But he never came up with any ideas or anything like that. He did what Leo told him to do. And George was a nice man, actually, very nice. But he's like some of these guys that they've got to get their finger in it somewhere, you know, somewhere along the line. But he didn't have anything to do with the product at all. At least not to my knowledge, and I'm pretty well acquainted with it. And he worked in the factory is all I can say for him.
Was there any sort of unsung hero in the whole process of Fender? Some guy who didn't get credit? Would that be perhaps Don Randall or Freddie Tavares, you think?
I don't know of anybody that falls in that category. I traveled extensively for the company for 25 years or more, and I had people I knew intimately all over Europe, all over the United States, and a great many musicians. And I was very, very happy with the situation. I met a lot of guys that I thought were interesting, and so that's all I can say about him. Just, but as far as Freddie goes, or so we're talking about George. Freddie Tavares did a great deal of legwork on the amplifiers, and it always come out as Leo's work because Freddie would go to Leo with everything and talk to him about it, and if Leo saw anything, well, he'd say something, but actually Freddie was the mainspring of the deal. But George didn't do a damn thing except work in the factory. But
so the guys who sort of, what's interesting is we were talking earlier about Billy Carson and the idea that certain people have come forward and said, well, it was my idea to do the double horns, it was my idea to do the slender back, these sort of things. Is that credit ever given to the right person as far as you're concerned?
I don't know any of those guys that deserve any of the credit, to tell you the truth. You know, when we would take for example from the Telecaster on up, we would put that instrument out with a number of people, musicians, and be very, very rough, and let them play it. And they were always eager to help us. And they come back with maybe 2 or 3 or 4 ideas, and we'd notate them and try the next guy, and we'd have maybe 2 dozen people cataloging that stuff.
Wow.
And whatever seemed to fall in be the biggest portion of the conversation, we'd try to do that. In other words, if we had the controls one place, they'd want them another, and here, and wherever that we'd get the most response out of, we'd figure that'd be the best place to go, which we did. And that pretty well was our checkpoint as far as the instruments are concerned.